All right, welcome everyone. So let's go ahead and get started. So I am happy to say that we have a guest speaker today, somebody I know very well. This is Rachel Dumais. She is a second year, almost third year student, graduate student in the BBSP program, so UNC's graduate program. And she works on the gut microbiome in her own work. And she'll be telling you everything you need to know about the gut microbiome today. And maybe if there's time, a little bit about your own work in a few sentences at the end. Okay?
Okay. Yeah, I can do that.
Because it's very cool.
Okay. So as Dr. Dowen just said, I'm going to be talking today about the influence of our gut microbiome on health and disease. And I have here at the beginning a couple of learning objectives for everyone. So again, if you can answer these questions generally after today's lecture, that means one, I've succeeded, and two, you know all you need to know for whatever exam you might have. And just to preface this, there is some slides with a lot of information. I'm going to give some highlights, but you can explore some of these topics more on the slides or on your own if you're interested in something in particular. Oh, that's not gonna move. Okay. So microbiome refers to the genetic material of all of the microbes that live in a particular environment. So that includes bacteria, fungi, viruses, and protozoa. Today, most of our examples and what we're going to be talking about is going to have to do with bacteria, but just know that there are these other types of microbes that are living in these microbiomes, including your gut microbiome. So humans have microbiomes in and on their body. So we have an oral microbiome, we have skin microbiomes in different areas of our body, and then we also have a gut microbiome, which is where we're going to talk today, because your gut obviously has a lot to do with metabolism. So that's where we're going to focus. How does your microbiome get established? So initially you have a sterile GI tract, and your mother actually, your mother's microbiome would influence your metabolism, and it can even influence your metabolism later in life. But your microbiome actually starts being established when you're born. And depending on your delivery method, whether you were a C-section or a vaginal birth, can have a big impact on what microbes initially inhabit your gut. But then as you grow and develop, we start having microbiomes that look a little bit more similar. And eventually, and even though there are some things that are unique about everyone's microbiomes, there are hallmarks of a healthy microbiome, which we'll touch on a little bit later. But everyone has a unique balance of Bacteroidetes and Firmicutes, which are phyla of bacteria. And that balance is unique to every person, but that does define a healthy state for your gut microbiome, and that can change in disease states or get disrupted and lead to metabolic disorders, which we'll talk about in a little while. So again, as I mentioned, when you're in utero, the maternal gut microbiome can influence a lot about your physiology, and your delivery method matters. And here is a study that was done in mice that looked into the maternal gut microbiome in pregnancy and how that influences offspring metabolic phenotypes in mice. So these offspring from germ-free mice, so you can see here that some mice were from moms that had a microbiome and some were from mice that don't have a microbiome. And then if these babies are eventually grown on high-fat diets, the progeny from germ-free mice actually have a higher body weight when they're challenged with a high-fat diet, And they also don't do as great a job later in life clearing glucose from their bodies. And so this is a pretty interesting finding about how mothers can actually influence their children's metabolism later in life, and that's based on their microbiome. In addition, then when we're born and we're growing up, we have increased amounts of bacteria as we grow, and we also have more species of bacteria that are colonizing our gut microbiome until we reach later in adolescence, and then we all have this unique balance of these two phyla of bacteria. And this can all be influenced by different factors. So when you're an infant, your microbiome composition could be influenced by things like your feeding method, whether or not you end up having to take a lot of antibiotics, your environment, and your genetics. And then as you increase in age, other factors begin to matter, like your hormones and your stress level. In adulthood, what becomes important to the homeostasis of your gut microbiome is your diet, your environment, again, your stress level, and then what medications you take. And I want to take a minute here to share that we actually don't have that great of an idea of all of the different types of bacteria that inhabit the human gut microbiome. So here's a study that was done in 2019 where they identified about 1,900 uncultured candidate bacteria from almost 12,000 human gut microbiomes. And this one study expanded our knowledge of the phylogenetic diversity of gut microbiome by 281%, right? So clearly we don't have that great of an idea of all of the types of species of bacteria that are living in the human gut microbiome. Oh, okay, cool. So then what happens to, oh no, did I go too far? Okay, cool. So then what happens if you get pregnant? What happens to your own microbiome when you get pregnant? So your microbiome can be affected by your hormones, your diet, again, environment, and also stress. And so here's a pretty interesting finding in monkeys that showed that reproductive hormones actually can mediate those changes in the gut microbiome. So in these wild monkeys, you can see that the diversity of microbes is changing to these different stages of reproduction. So whether the animals are cycling, pregnant, and lactation, and that has something to do with this, it correlates with the fluctuation in hormones in the monkeys. And this research team is now in the process of trying to do this in humans. That data isn't published, but if you're curious, stay tuned. Hopefully they will publish that work. So then what happens when we advance in age? So then the factors that influence our gut microbiome change a little bit. So again, your environment and what medications you take, and then how active you are also can impact your gut microbiome as we advance in age. And here's a really interesting study that was done in a neurodegenerative disease, C. elegans or nematode worm model. And this also shows that a single type of bacteria in your gut can actually have big impacts on your physiology and the way that you age. And so here you can see that animals that were eating Bacillus subtilis instead of E. coli are living significantly longer than those eating E. coli. In addition, they show here that so alpha-synuclein is aggregation is a sign of a phenotype of neurodegeneration. And so you can see here that these animals have these plaques forming, and this is where a lot of neurons are in the worms. And then if you feed these worms Bacillus subtilis, it can actually reverse these aggregates. So you can see here, you don't see these puncta of green, and those aggregates are being cleared, and that's a sign of more healthy aging. So one single type of bacteria that's in your gut can have a huge impact on your life and your physiology. Okay, so I threw a bunch of information at you, and I'm gonna stop here and see if anyone has questions before we move on. Yeah.
Back on the slide about the C-sections, it almost looked like I can't remember if it looks like there were disadvantages with a C-section birth. Is that true? Like it can be
Yeah, so from what I read, eventually your gut microbiome ends up looking a lot like everyone's microbiome ends up looking a lot alike, regardless of the method that you're birthed. But I can imagine that there probably is some lasting impact of those initial bacteria that colonize your gut, but I can find some more information on that for you.
Also, I know you mentioned that antibiotics have a role in the microbiome, so I guess even though there are antibiotics, eventually it gets to a point where, like you said, that being similar between individuals, so they're not at a disadvantage.
Yeah, so that's a really good point about antibiotics, and we'll come back to them a couple of times. But the purpose of antibiotics is to destroy bacteria in your gut, right? And so, but it's not specific to certain bacteria. So the problem with using excessive amounts of bacteria, especially when you don't even have a microbiome established, is that it gives opportunity for pathogenic bacteria to overproliferate in your gut. So there are instances where maybe when you were young, if you were taking a lot of antibiotics, that could be detrimental in the long run because you could damage your GI tract from a very early age because maybe you picked up a pathogenic bacteria when you were in the hospital as an infant, and now you took antibiotics and it allowed that to proliferate in your gut. So there are definitely instances where taking antibiotics from a young age could have lasting impacts, maybe not in the long run on what bacteria, but definitely on physiology. Yeah.
How like specifically does like having a vaginal birth versus a C-section change the gut microbiome? So I mean,
Yeah.
it's not really like super interacting.
Yeah. So, well, for one thing, you have a lot of different microbiomes on your skin. And so the vaginal microbiome actually is a place where infants can pick up microbes as they're being delivered, whereas a C-section is a super sterile procedure where a baby is being taken out of you. And so they don't have an opportunity to come into contact with bacteria on your body or in the hospital.
So does that like bacteria or like it just like gets into their system somehow?
Yeah. Yeah. You like eat it or it just gets.
So is that how it gets? Okay,
Yeah. And so, right. So as you're eating, right, I showed you that what you're eating as an infant matters, right? So like what you're consuming in your body, some of those bacteria might take hold in your gut and colonize that space. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nice. I know that. So
It's
like
okay.
baby formula, I know
Yeah.
how everybody's breastfed.
Yeah.
Baby formula have components where it helps to build stuff like that.
I don't think I can answer that specifically, but I do know that that difference in feeding method does have impact on what microbes are in your gut. And you get more microbes, again, from your mom's your skin microbiome, et cetera, if you're breastfeeding versus if you're switching to food earlier. But yeah. Okay. Also, to build out that idea of how you actually establish this microbiome, here is where the microbes actually live in your gut, right? So the majority of microorganisms that are living in your gut are actually found in the large intestines and in the colon. And that's because the pH, just the environment of your gut, it's more suitable for bacteria to live in these a little bit higher pHs than in your stomach, which is super acidic, and there's a lot less bacteria that colonize that area. And so where your microbiome is really affecting metabolism is in your large intestines and in your colon. So what is the role of the gut microbiome in our metabolism? So the gut microbiome influences metabolism in a couple of different ways. So it microbes in your gut metabolize carbohydrates. They can metabolize proteins. They can be involved in synthesis of vitamins like vitamin K and the B group vitamins. They have a small role in the metabolism of bile acids. And then something that I think is pretty interesting is that these phytochemicals and polyphenols that are found in fruits and vegetables, when the bacteria break down those molecules, they can produce metabolites that are beneficial for our health, including antioxidant capacity of these molecules and anti-cancer effect. What we're going to focus on today is the metabolism of carbohydrates. I know this slide looks scary, but it's just to show you the massive network of things that your gut microbiome is influencing in your body. And you may recognize some of these pathways from other sections of this class. And I just wanted to give you this slide to mull over sort of on your own time and think about the complex relationship that we have with our microbes in our guts. And like I said, we're going to focus here on the very far side where these dietary fibers are being made into short chain fatty acids and how that's going to affect physiology. So I just mentioned that these non-digestible carbohydrates, mostly coming from fruits and vegetables, are being fermented by your gut microbiome into short chain fatty acids, and specifically into acetate, butyrate, and propionate. And then those three short chain fatty acids are known to have effects on whole body energy homeostasis. Homeostasis, yeah. Okay. And those short chain fatty acids can have an effect on your local, on the local environment where they're produced, and also a systemic influence. And so on a local level, again, these carbohydrates are being fermented by your gut bacteria into these three short chain fatty acids. And those can be passively or actively taken up by epithelial cells in your gut. And they are actually, the metabolism of the short chain fatty acids by those cells is their main source of energy supply for your gastrointestinal cells. In addition, then those short chain fatty acids can be transported out of those cells, the excess that isn't being used for energy, and that can be transported through the blood to peripheral tissues. And so then that brings us to the more systemic ways that short chain fatty acids are affecting our metabolism. And so this is just to give you a general sense of all of the different ways that short chain fatty acids can systemically impact our homeostasis. And we'll come back to this idea of the gut-brain axis. You guys read something about that for class. And so generally, when these short chain fatty acids are made and then are getting into your bloodstream, they can impact your gut directly by being transported to the gut-brain barrier, or they can also induce the secretion of gut hormones. That's the second pathway right here. Or they can be transported to your liver and have to do with mitochondrial function and also increased secretion of B cells. And again, that's gonna change your body homeostasis. In addition, they have a role in the in inflammation, both locally in the gut and also systemically through the induction of T regulatory cells differentiation and secretion of interleukins. So that's this pathway here. Okay. Let's see where we're at now. Okay, so I want to take a quick step back from there and talk about what actually constitutes a healthy microbiome. So I've been saying there are some features of a microbiome that make it healthy. And the major thing to take away from that is that a healthy microbiome is resilient to disturbances is resistant to disturbances and is resilient. So after disturbance, maybe you've been super stressed and that can impact your microbiome. How well can your microbiome come back from that stress? Can it reestablish itself to a more homeostatic state? And then there's also a lot of functional redundancy in your gut microbiome. So there's bacteria that are doing the same job. And so if you lose one, there's usually another microbial species that can take over that role. And so you don't end up in unhealthy states as easily. And these disturbances that can challenge your gut microbiome are age, geography, lifestyle-related factors, and again, what medications you might be taking. Okay, so I have a quick hypothetical question for you to think about after that section. So what do you think might happen if the bacteria responsible for fermentation of non-digestible carbohydrates were no longer present in a person's gut microbiome? Yeah. Yeah, that's what would happen for sure.
Yeah. Your body moves in spaces, so it's just.
Yeah, that's true, right. That's good, we're building here, right? So you get a loss of these short chain fatty acids, you end up in a state of non-homeostasis, and then what could you imagine systemically, metabolism-wise, could go wrong? What happens when you're no longer in a metabolic homeostatic state? Yeah. Yep, and disorders, right? Okay. So one major thing that can happen is dysbiosis, which is a driver and both a driver and a consequence of metabolic disease. And dysbiosis represents an imbalance of the normal microbial community within your body. And this is associated with all sorts of different metabolic disorders, from liver disease and cancer, diabetes, obesity, Alzheimer's, etc. So to reiterate, when we have a healthy situation, you have a higher mucosal, a larger mucosal layer around the epithelial cells, and you have production of antimicrobial signals that are keeping out pathogenic bacteria from keeping them from overproliferating. And you have the production of short chain fatty acids, and systemically you have lower energy intake, and then you have a low blood glucose level. So then in a dysbiotic state, you have a thinning of this mucosal layer. You have decreased antimicrobial defense, decreased production of short chain fatty acids that can lead to different pathogenic materials leaking through your gut that can trigger large immune responses. And you have increased inflammation, increased energy intake, and increased blood glucose. So we talked about some of the things that can challenge your gut microbiome. And so one of those things is your diet and your lifestyle. And so from an evolutionary perspective, humans are genetically and physiologically designed to thrive on diets rich in non-digestible fibers, right? Because these short chain fatty acids have such a big impact on our health. So if you look over here on the left, if you are eating a diet that's high in fiber, low in animal fat, and low in animal protein, that stimulates this thick mucosal layer. You have a strong barrier in your gut. You have lots of short chain fatty acids being made, and systemically that leads to low blood glucose and glucose stimulated insulin secretion. But then what if you decide to all of a sudden change your diet or your lifestyle? Maybe you become more sedentary. Maybe you start drinking more alcohol. All of you guys are in college. Just saying. Or maybe you change your diet and now you're eating more fat and protein. So now all of a sudden you have a decreased mucosal layer and you're not making these short chain fatty acids. All of a sudden other metabolites are being made because you have all of these proteins and you don't have these non-digestible carbohydrates, and you have an increase in inflammation, and that can lead to high blood glucose levels and then low glucose stimulated insulin secretion. So one metabolic disorder that we know has a lot to do with your lifestyle choices, and we've seen a big increase in obesity over the last century, right? Because as a human population, we're changing the way that we live and the way that we eat. And obesity can happen if you have changes in your circadian rhythm. There's this idea in obesity of the yo-yo effect. So you have, even after intervention, your microbiome can remember that metabolic state that they were in, and that can lead to people regaining all of that weight that they lost during the intervention. And then you also have systemic inflammation as a hallmark of obesity. And again, the microbiome has a big role in that as well. Another disease that you guys, I'm sure, have talked a lot about in this class is type 2 diabetes. So as a recap, in type 2 diabetes, there's an impairment in the way that your body regulates glucose and uses fuel. The cells in your muscle, fat, and liver become resistant to insulin, and the pancreas is unable to produce enough insulin to manage your blood glucose level. And one thing that's prescribed to people that have type 2 diabetes is metformin. So I found this super interesting study that found that, again, an increase in one type of bacteria population in the gut that's induced by metformin treatment improves the glucose homeostasis in diet-induced obese mice. So their first thing that they did is they looked at the microbiomes of these 4 different cohorts of people, both people that didn't have diabetes and people with diabetes. And then in both those 2 groups, people were taking metformin or not taking metformin. And they found that this bacteria either increases because you're taking metformin, or because they actually gave you that bacteria to consume. They found that gave them to mice, not to people, but gave the bacteria to mice to eat. You can see that the number of goblet cells for metformin or with this bacteria are going up to more normal levels, and also they're able to handle, they're able to clear more glucose. All right, so I mentioned a little bit before the gut-brain axis, and these were some of the ways that the gut-brain axis is interacting, and this comes from the reading that you guys did for today. So stress is another factor that can induce dysbiosis and cause GI disorders. And this is a figure from a study that they did with soldiers. So soldiers are under an incredible amount of combined stresses. So physiological, environment, physical stress. And then they're also being stressed because maybe they have a change in their diet, or maybe they are in a space that have new pathogens that their body hasn't experienced before. And so they were looking at all these stress factors, and they saw that all these stressors are leading to dysbiosis, and that's leading to pro-inflammatory response, and it's leading to the production of those different metabolites that are interacting with their gut, and that can have a big impact on your mental health. One specific GI disorder is irritable bowel syndrome. And this is considered a disorder of the gut-brain interaction. And there's 2 different types of irritable bowel syndrome. One is spontaneous And then the other one occurs after a specific a specific pathogen compromises your immune system. And so in this example of non-specific IBS, so this is a sporadic kind, you have chronic pain in your abdominal, there's a change in your bowel habits, and these are likely the result of genetic and environmental and dietary factors, all things that are impacting your gut microbiome. And so these are the two different states that you might be in that we've been talking a lot about, right? You're ingesting food, and then if you have a dysbiotic state, you have a lower mucosal layer, you have increased inflammation, and it's producing all of these metabolites that are then entering your blood and being sent to the brain, and that can lead to chronic stress and depression and anxiety. So this state can also happen after specific pathogens compromise the integrity of your epithelial layer. And that can happen because they're outcompeting your natural healthy microbiome. And the one pathogen I wanted to introduce was this C. diff, because we're hopefully going to have time to do a quick case study at the end of class today, and that specific bacteria will become important there. So how can we promote a healthy microbiome? Right, we've just learned about all these ways that your microbiome can be challenged and go wrong and lead to systemic metabolism disorders. So different ways that we can promote a healthy microbiome on an individual basis is our diet and reducing stress. And we talked about circadian rhythm, so being respectful of our sleep patterns. And then we can take a more direct approach of meeting our gut microbiome by actually ingesting specific bacteria. And so these interventions can come in the form of probiotics, which are live microorganisms that you eat and are good for your health. They can come in the form of prebiotics, which are compounds in food that induce the growth or activity of beneficial microorganisms, such as bacterial fungi. Maybe you take something that stimulates your gut microbiome to make more short-chain fatty acids, because we know that that's good for our health. And then this last one, antibiotics are tricky, and that's part of our case study today, because they're used for the treatment and prevention of bacterial infections, right? So they will kill pathogenic bacteria, but they'll also compromise your natural gut microbiome. And then if your microbiome is resilient enough, it will sort of reach homeostasis again. But if not, if you continually take antibiotics, you can really do a lot of damage to your GI tract. Okay. Questions about all of that information? Yeah.
Okay, so this is one that's like diet and lifestyle. I was gonna ask, what do you think that the impact of the pandemic is going to have on gut microbiome, considering that we both, sedentary life and just being able to.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating question, and I wonder if there are people that will take that into account that are currently doing microbiome studies with humans. I don't have a good answer for that, but I think it'll be really interesting to see what that means for us as a population, for sure. Yeah, we're also traveling less, right? So we're seeing less new spaces.
Yeah, so would you say that this is completely unrelated, but
Yeah.
would you say that stress causes a reduction of good bacteria, and prolonged stress will eventually cause these diseases? Is that kind of
Yeah, I think, well, stress is that is definitely one way that you can look at it. I think stress is a little complicated. It's one of those things that can go both ways, right? Like stress could down the road lead to metabolic problems, or maybe you have a instance where you get sick and you have a pathogenic bacteria and that compromises your gut, and then all of a sudden that's changing your mental health and that's changing your stress, right? So I think it's a two-way street, but what you said is correct.
So a little bit of stress could allow it to practice getting better, but
It could. Yeah, I could imagine that is the case, that if you challenge your microbiome a little bit, that would help it be more resilient, but I'm not sure. That would be interesting to look up. Yeah.
You said that there was some type of it helps like sensitivity and stuff. Are there other cases that develop types of bacteria?
So I'm not aware. So there's definitely a push towards in the clinical setting of understanding a person's gut microbiome and using that as a therapeutic tool. And we will see a case today of using in the case study that is sort of along the lines of that. I'm not sure that doctors specifically prescribe certain antibiotics or not antibiotics, certain probiotics when you have type 2 diabetes, but I think that that's sort of the direction that we're moving, but I'm not sure of other specific examples. I'm actually not sure. Actually, I think you can purchase supplements of that bacteria because I was looking it up. Yeah.
A lot of the like metabolites and stuff that we talk about, we can like look at it and see like varying levels, or this level is an indicator of like being healthy, or like longer lifespan or shorter lifespan depending on levels. Is there a way to like see the like sample of gut microbiome as like an indicator of like lifespan or other things?
Yeah, when I was doing Googling for this, it seems like the push again, if from the clinical standpoint, would be eventually to use people's individual gut microbiomes to predict some things about that person's health, or maybe their susceptibility to certain diseases. I'm not sure what's being marketed right now for that. Again, we're still learning about all the different types of bacteria that are in people's gut, so I think we're kind of a long way from that, but I can imagine that would be a good idea for sure. Yeah.
There are a lot of probiotics that are marketed stress. Like,
Yeah.
maybe not test it.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. It's something that I'm interested in my own research, right? Because probiotics is this thing that's becoming super apparent that it's important to our health, but they're regulated by the FDA as health aids, which means they don't have to be rigorously and reproducibly tested, and there aren't as strict rules. Although I think I saw recently some legislation that's moving towards stricter regulations for probiotics because of how much of an impact they have on our health. But also like fermented foods are a source of probiotics, right? Like I specifically am interested in how kombucha affects your gut microbiome and your health, right? And so, kombucha is also regulated as a health aid. So they don't even have to tell you what microbes are in those teas, those fermented teas that you're drinking. And so your question, what was your actual question? I got off topic. Yeah, so people definitely take probiotics often. I'm not sure how often doctors will say you should take a probiotic. I know from personal experience, like some doctors do, some doctors don't. I don't know if people in medical school now are learning more about probiotics, but hopefully they are. I don't know. I'm not. Yeah.
So in that case, are we saying that too much probiotics? I don't know if that's what you're saying. Because if you're trying to regulate it more, why are we regulate it more because probiotics such a healthy benefit?
Oh, they're regulating it more because people don't have to have done super strict research to say that this bacterial species or this group of bacterial species in this little capsule that you're going to eat actually are going to be beneficial to you. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was saying. Sorry, I wasn't clear. Yeah.
Is it better to take probiotics during or after antibiotic treatment?
Yeah, I don't think I could actually say because I'm not a clinician, but I could imagine that taking them during and after would probably be a good idea. I think now they're telling people to eat more yogurt and stuff while they're taking antibiotics, to try to maintain some of those healthy. There's a lot of like lactobacillus in yogurt, and that's a good microbe to have in your gut. And so I think doctors are increasingly telling people to eat yogurt and that sort of thing during and after antibiotic treatment. Yeah. But the antibiotics are going to wreak havoc and kill everything in there. So it probably would be a good idea to take it both. I don't think it would affect antibiotics' ability to kill things if you take it during, but I don't know. I'm not a doctor, so yeah.
So if GABA is secreted from the gut epithelium, are there like certain microbiomes or like certain microbes that would cause like GABA secretion?
Yes, the microbes that are making the short chain fatty acids, because the short chain fatty acids are stimulating the production of those neurotransmitters.
If they could use that then to like treat neurodegenerative disorders or like seizure disorders?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure, but definitely something to,
I think that's a vote.
yeah, to look into. I'm sure people are looking into that. Yeah.
Do you think since like in the past year with like COVID and everything, I feel like most people have been like using more disinfectants and sanitation and stuff like that. Do you think that like babies born like during this time are gonna have like less developed, like because they're not interacting with as many bacteria, especially if they're in the home where they're disinfecting and stuff? Is that gonna cause like poor development of like the gut microbiome?
Yeah, I don't know about poor development, but there definitely is research out there about how we're living in cleaner spaces, not even necessarily because of the pandemic, although it's exacerbated by that. But even over the last century, we've been living in even more sterile conditions, and that definitely has an impact on our gut microbiome and what species are colonizing, for sure. Yeah.
Slide where the higher the pH, the higher the concentration of liquid bacteria in the gut microbiome.
Yeah.
I'm having trouble understanding how if you have probiotic yogurt, what's stopping the stomach acid from killing all of
it?
Yeah.
That's a good question, and I would have to look a little bit more into the physiology, but I think just like a few of them survive and end up getting passed further down your GI tract and just are able to survive and take hold. And then once they reach that more favorable condition lower in your GI tract, they can actually start proliferating, right? So it's just that a few of them escape being destroyed by the super acidic stomach. Yeah. Yeah, because when you're eating bacteria, you're eating millions and millions of bacteria. You can imagine like one or two might be able to survive that environment.
It passes through part of the GI tract versus colonizing part of the GI tract is two
Oh yeah,
very
right. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, actually, like setting up residence in part of your GI tract is different than just being passed through. And that's another interesting thing, right? Like a lot of our research is done on stool samples. And you actually don't get a holistic idea of all of the bacteria that are colonizing your gut because you're not excreting all of the types of bacteria every time. And so that's another concern about studying the human gut microbiome. Because it's hard to get a good sense of everything that's in there because we use stool samples. Plus, we don't actually know what most of them are.
So keep in mind that the microbiome field is we've been studying researching microbiome.
Yeah, I think they said that like 80 or 90% of the literature available on the microbiome comes from the last, I don't know, 8 or 10 years. And everything, and before that there were like 400 papers, and now there's thousands of papers being published on this topic. So
This is
yeah.
all because of the advances in sequencing.
Yes. Yeah, they're also, some of these are really hard to culture in the lab. And so you're not gonna, and so before, you could take a fecal sample, collect the bacteria, spread them on plates or, and then grow them in the lab. But you were limited to whatever grew. And a lot of these, some of these are anaerobic bacteria, so they don't like to be in oxygen, right? And they're living in some of these are extremophiles, and so they like to live in more extreme environments, like more acidic parts of your gut or no oxygen. And so that also makes it tough to culture these bacteria in the lab. So again, yeah, as Dr. Dowen said, sequencing has made this field possible.
Are there ways to donate your microbiome for that study?
Yeah, there is. The Human Gut Microbiome Project is a huge citizen science project where you can, and it's actually the American Gut Microbiome Project specifically, that not right now because of COVID, but you can get a kit and you can send in a stool sample and they'll add you to the bank of all of these gut microbiomes that they're establishing in their data set. I'm not sure how much health information you get back, but you're definitely contributing to science. So yeah, something cool to look into if you are interested. Yeah.
So I saw you guys study like C. elegans and all organisms.
Yeah, so I use C. elegans to study the gut microbiome. And it's really nice to study the microbiome in C. elegans because whatever you feed them constitutes their gut microbiome. So you can have them eat it, like this slide show, you can have them eat a single bacterial species and study what happens to them physiologically. C. elegans are digesting the bacteria as their fuel source. And so their microbiome only consists of the microorganisms that escape being digested by the animal, and having more bacteria in their gut actually happens later in life and is a sign of a pathogen, and it starts to degrade their physiology. So it's great in some ways, but there are caveats. Other animals, even like flies, have a more traditional microbiome where they have microbes that colonize their gut, that it's not their only source of fuel. And so I think those would be considered more like traditional microbiomes, but C. elegans are really nice because what they eat is what's affecting them. Yeah.
But wild still
Yeah, that's true.
established
Yeah, but wild C. elegans do have established microbiomes.
that are complex.
Yeah. It's just, yeah, I just say that it's different because it is their primary food source, where other animals, it's, yeah, considered more traditional microbiome. Okay. We have 25 minutes. Okay, cool. I think that gives us enough time. All right, so I have a case study. And I'm gonna warn you, these graphics are pretty terrible in this video, but we're gonna get through it. And then we're gonna go through the first section of the case study and think about some questions. So,
We can cut it off whenever.
yeah,
I'll make sure.
like I said, terrible graphics.
I'm down here in my human host college freshman Chris's stomach as a member of the microbiome.
Yeah.
What's a microbiome? you
Yeah.
ask? Well, there's
Maybe.
probably trillions of microbial organisms in and on Chris and any other human for that matter. I am a member of the bacteria domain. Out of my bacterial friends and family. Some live close by in the intestines,
Can you hear it now?
others live as far away as Kristen's mouth, respiratory system, skin, and reproductive system. Scientists have been studying the microbiome, and they have discovered a lot about bacteria like me who comprise it. More recently, scientists have realized that it is not just bacteria that live here. It is also archaea, fungi, and protists. There are even quite a few viruses that inhabit the healthy microbiome. Unseen by most, we make up quite an exotic group. There are so many of us living here, at least as many of us as there are Kristen's own cells, if not more of us. Let me introduce you to some of the microbes who live here. This is my friend Millie Methanosphera, a member of the Archaea domain.
Hi, I'm Millie Methanosphera, and I'm an archaea. Like the bacteria, my domain has been around for over 3 billion years, and we are both prokaryotic. That means our DNA is free in our cells. No need to have it enclosed in a membrane like those eukaryotes do. We are very independent, always made up of just one cell, and we are simple folk. We don't have any of those specialized organelles that eukaryotes have. I, like many archaea, am an extremophile. Extremophiles live in some pretty radical environments, such as very high or low temperatures, or where there's a lot of sulfur or salt. Here in Kristen's gut, I live where there is almost no oxygen. It is important to note that I may look similar to most bacteria, but inside I am significantly different.
Thank you, Millie. And here are a few of my other friends, Charles Chylomastix and Carla Candida.
Hi, I'm Charles. Next to me is Carla. It's nice to meet you. We're happy to finally be noticed and talked about. Everyone is so focused on the bacteria, and they forget all about us. We are eukaryotic, which means our DNA is in a special place in our cells called the nucleus. We also have a bunch of other specialized organelles that those prokaryotes just don't have. I'm a protist, and Carla is a fungus. Although we are both single-celled, many eukaryotic organisms are multicellular. Our host, Kristen, is a eukaryote, as are all humans. Recently, scientists have started paying more attention to our role in the human microbiome.
Lastly, I want you to meet Phage, who is very different from the other organisms we've already met.
Hi, I'm happy to be included in this menagerie, even though I'm really not even considered a cell, and I'm so much smaller than the rest of you. I'm a bacteriophage, which is a type of virus. Because I can only reproduce inside a living cell, some scientists argue that I'm not even really alive. Although the role of viruses as part of the microbiome is still unclear, scientists have realized that there are so many viruses found in a healthy human microbiome that we get our own name. Together, I and all my virus buddies are called the virome.
We are definitely a diverse bunch. It took a while for scientists to realize exactly how diverse, because so many microbes don't grow well in the lab, so it has been difficult to determine just how many different types of us there are. Now that there are new genetic techniques, scientists can characterize us based on our DNA. Hey, Heidi, you forgot to introduce me. I am a bacterium also, and I want to talk about myself. No, sorry, Carmen, you are a pathogen, and if there are too many of you, people can get very sick. That's one of the things the rest of us do down here. We take up space and resources so organisms like you can't gain a foothold. We'll see, Heidi, we'll see. Ha 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 ha. Sorry about that distraction. Now that I have spent so much time introducing you to my friends, let me tell you a little more about myself. Hard to determine what microbial composition makes up a healthy human microbiome. Scientists no longer believe that there is an ideal set of specific microbes found in each human. One thing that does seem clear, however, is that although scientists may not understand the specific role of each microbial species in the microbiome, diversity of species is critical. There is likely a set of metabolic functions we perform, but different microbes may perform these functions in different individuals. Some of these functions include breakdown of carbohydrates, synthesis of vitamin D, regulation of pH, and education of the immune system so it functions properly. There are quite a few external factors that can change the makeup of the microbial population, such as diet, age, or antibiotic use. It is important that we be resilient and able to recover from change. If we are not able to do that, our human host can end up in dysbiosis, or in other words, a microbial imbalance.
You know, Heidi, our host Kristen takes a lot of antibiotics. Every time she gets one of those respiratory infections, her doctor prescribes them. Doesn't she realize that those drugs don't just target the bad bacteria, they target all bacteria? Talk about being at risk for dysbiosis and letting microbes like Clostridium take over.
Well, Millie, we'll just have to hope for the best. Do you know that quite a few important studies to fully characterize our role in human health and disease are ongoing?
All right. Well, okay. Okay, so now that we have watched that, okay, we're going to read through this case study and then we have some questions. So because I have the mic and we have some Zoom people, I will read it. Okay, so consider the video that we just watched and recall that Heidi Heliobacter was the main character, and she introduced you to a vast array of different types of microbes that are part of the human microbiome. Heidi and her friends inhabited Kristen, then a college freshman. The next part of the story takes place a year after the scene from the video. Kristen is now a college sophomore, and she was in the hospital again, and she couldn't take it anymore. This was her third time with C. diff, and by far the worst. The diarrhea was almost uncontrollable, her stomach was killing her, and she had a fever. C. diff, which is shorthand for Clostridium difficile infection, which results from a bacterium that can be present in our guts naturally, but usually in very low numbers. When it proliferates, it can cause symptoms ranging from mild diarrhea to severe ulcerative colitis. About 500,000 people in the US are diagnosed with C. diff each year, and 29,000 die. C. diff generally affects older patients, but unfortunately is becoming more common in younger populations. It is frequently a hospital-acquired infection. Kristen's doctor said that she had probably picked it up initially when she was in the hospital with pneumonia, and it had just never been adequately treated. Kristen has missed so much school, she didn't know how she was ever going to catch up. Okay. Deep inside Kristen's gut, things were a lot different than they had been a year ago. Heidi Heliobacter and her friends were nowhere to be found. Heidi was most likely killed by all of the antibiotics Kristen had been taking, and her non-bacterial friends, although not susceptible to antibiotics, probably died off from the disruption of their microbial habitat. Clostridium and her friends had taken over and were brewing all sorts of poisons. Okay. So it's a new microbiome now, laughed Carmen Crisilium menacingly. Up above, Kristen was talking to Dr. O'Halloran, really? Okay. Why does this keep happening to me, moaned Kristen. Your pediatrician really did you disservice by prescribing all of those antibiotics to you over the years every time you came down with bronchitis. The antibiotics killed off the good bacteria in your gut and let some of the stronger, nastier ones grow. Your microbiome has been disrupted and you are in dysbiosis. It may sound disgusting to you, but we have had very good success treating patients who have C. diff with fecal transplants, where you administer fecal feces from a healthy donor to repopulate the gut with normal flora. What is despite what? Asked Kristen. And you want me to do what? Give me someone else's poop? Kristen, you can't keep going on like this. We can give you another round of antibiotics targeted to Clostridium difficile, but you know every time you do that in the long run is likely going to make the problem worse. Look how miserable you are now. You are too young to be debilitated like this. Please read this information sheet and talk it over with your family. I'll come back tonight to answer any questions and you can let me know what you decide. So take a second and read through this fact sheet about fecal transplants. Everybody feel like they have a good idea about what this intervention is? Okay. So now I'm gonna ask a couple of these questions. We'll do 3 through 6, and anyone can feel free to answer. So why does Dr. O'Halloran tell Kristen that in the long run, antibiotic treatment will make her C. diff worse? Yes, Sarah.
Because it improves the ratios of like the good.
So increase the chances of C. diff with antibiotic.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, definitely something to be worried about. Okay. So the proper term for fecal transplant is fecal microbiota transplant, or FMT. Why would FMT work as a treatment for this illness, for illnesses such as C. diff? Yeah.
It's gonna introduce all of the ones that have gotten put off by the antibiotics, and so it'll allow them to proliferate and hopefully reclaim.
Yes. Did you have anything to add? Okay, great. All right. Besides what was included in the brief information flyer, what else would be valuable to you in making your decision? This is just a hypothetical question. What questions might you have for the doctor when he came back later to ask if he wanted the treatment? Yeah.
Say like potential risks or things that could go wrong during the procedure or.
I would want to elaborate here.
I would have to be like wiped out.
I don't know, how long is it gonna take for those microbes to proliferate enough for me no longer to have these experiences? Okay, so $1 billion question. If you were Kristen, would you have a fecal transplant? Why or why not? Yeah.
Personally, I would. Although it is a little invasive of a procedure, I see that the success rate is 90%. I feel like where we go.
I also feel like the risk, knowing, I mean, there's not that many risks of this, but they outweigh the benefits outweigh the risk because it's better than being in pain, and I guess like dehydration, I should say, constipation. Just those factors and stuff are kind of dangerous for your body also. Yeah, for sure.
Why not try something less invasive like probiotics first?
Yeah, that's a great question. Maybe that would work for her. Yeah. Well, probiotics is literally just so there's like foods that have probiotics that I could see potentially also giving nutrients to these pathogenic bacteria. But if you're just taking the capsule of probiotics, that's literally just microorganisms. But I don't know if just taking a bunch of probiotics is enough mass of cells to actually reestablish a microbiome, or if they're actually implanting X times the amount of bacteria. But that's a good question. Yeah.
I feel like maybe the like probiotics taking wouldn't have a big enough diversity of like bacteria and other things to like actually reestablish like the unhealthy microbiome, because we, like you said, we still don't even know all of the diversity that's in there and stuff like that. So
Yeah. That's such a good thought. Yeah. Who knows if what you're consuming in a probiotic is going to be enough to reestablish homeostasis. Yeah.
Like other transplants, like transplants for like blood transfusion, it was worried about the immune response. So with like this kind of transplant, what's stopping the immune system from just going crazy and like attacking all the bacteria? Like transplant
That
because
eat
it is
bacteria?
object.
Yeah. I don't really have a good answer for that. I don't think your body would have an issue because it's being introduced to all sorts of new bacteria all the time. And these are bacterial species that we commonly have a relationship with in our gut. And so I think your body would recognize them as commensate species, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that's a risk. It's a good question. Yeah.
So by reestablishing the gut homeostasis, are the new healthy bacteria able to actually like secrete something to actually kill those pathogens themselves, or is it just they take up space?
Yeah. I think they would just outcompete them, and if you had a massive amount of stressors, right? If she again started taking massive amounts of antibiotics, it's probably not going to totally clear the C. diff. That's going to be a bacteria that's going to always be in her gut. It's just managing it and making sure that it's always being outcompeted by the good bacteria. Yeah, that's a good question. You're not really
So could they potentially like prescribe an antibiotic to try to kill off these like the C. diff before the fecal transplant? Is that something that happens?
I'm trying to think from my like own personal experience. I know somebody who had C. diff, and there was like a tea or like a dietary change you can make that sort of starves the C. diff, and then you can also do these other interventions. But I don't know how successful that is, and that's just something that I know passively from experience. I can't totally answer that question. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's true too. For sure.
Come up with any other type of like delivery methods, like maybe like taking a healthy donor and then growing that bacteria and opening it via some sort of capsule or something. So I feel like both their methods are like very invasive and it's impossible and uncomfortable.
Yeah, I don't know. I do wonder if they're trying to do that. Again, I don't know the numbers, right? Like I don't know how much you would have to actually like consume for it to do the same as a fecal transplant. Or maybe it has something to do, like, right, if you're ingesting a tablet and then your stomach's killing most of what you're consuming, right? So the nice thing about using like a colonoscopy or whatever is that you can implant those bacteria straight into that environment where they can happily grow. instead of having to survive through the low pH of the upper GI.
I think whatever you can imagine is the important.
Oh, yeah.
So that's why companies try to develop these technologies.
Yeah.
And healthy individuals, but also for disease states.
Mhm.
Where it's been shown that microbiome really influences disease states. That's important also like cancer.
Yeah.
So there are companies that are bringing the right diet, the right microbiome for your cancer.
And that's especially related to your topic on Tuesday about inflammation, which is massively detrimental and leads to all of these different disease states. And the microbiome has a big impact on inflammation. Okay, you're free. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.